Hi, I'm Nostalgia Nerd and welcome to Did You Know Gaming Extra. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at Sega's contribution to the third generation of console gaming, kicked off by the golden age of arcades, the Master System. The home console market had taken a hard hit after the crash of '83, which saw the gaming sphere oversaturated with consoles and truly terrible third-party software. Despite the crash, the life and soul of gaming was still very much alive in bowling alleys and shopping malls. Arcade cabinets housed enough power to outstrip anything bought on store shelves, and offered experimental titles with superior design. It's no surprise that companies looking to sell home consoles would turn their attention to porting and emulating the games that kept players, pocket change in hand, coming back for more. Japan quickly became gaming's market leader, most notably due to the overwhelming popularity of the NES, which offered highly polished titles produced in-house. However, as far as Europe and South America were concerned, it was Sega's Master System that ruled supreme. The system's library featured ports of Sega's more popular arcade titles, such as Golden Axe and Outrun, as well as of high-quality games that came built into the system's BIOS, including Hang On, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Alex Kidd in Miracle World. The console also had some incredibly rare and obscure titles, such as Game de Check Kotsuanzan, which may have had fewer than 1,000 copies printed. Co-developed by Sega and insurance company Marine Tokyo, the game's title can be roughly translated to Check the Game, Traffic Safety. It consists of 3 minigames aiming to promote road awareness, an interactive hazard perception video, much like modern-day theory tests, a 6-minute driving simulation, where players can lose points for failing to follow traffic laws, and demonstrations on safe usage of pedestrian crossings. This last one in particular is aimed at children, with parents and teachers encouraged to watch and assist. Edutainment games were growing in popularity as technology found its way into classrooms, and developers focused on the gamification of problem-solving in an emerging new genre. This alone is partially responsible for Game de Check's rarity. The game was never meant to be sold commercially, and was only available on loan for schools and residents' associations that wanted it. Tokyo Marine outlined plans to keep a master system with Game de Check already built into the console at each branch of the company in Japan, totaling 1,000 units. However, whether this loan service was ever put into action remains unknown. A Japanese newspaper article published in 1988 was the only evidence the game even existed until January 2010, when a single copy went up for auction by a private collector. Despite the listing featuring only photos of the cartridge, with no in-game screenshots provided, the auction closed at an offer of 800,000 yen, approximately $9,000. This large figure was actually something of a bargain, as the seller had listed their ideal price at 3 million yen or $32,000. There is very little else known about Game de Check, other than what this elusive private collector has relayed to us, that the game is surrealist, but nonetheless good-looking and well-made. And since the auction's closure, there has been no new information divulged by its new owner. Some unreleased Master System titles never even made it to cartridge to begin with, like Lemmings 2: The Tribes. The original Lemmings began life on the Amiga, but its status as a third-party title meant it had no console loyalty, and was rapidly ported to just about every platform in existence. So it came as no surprise to fans that developer DMA Design would do the same with the sequel in 1993. However, it wasn't until 2006 that programmer Matt Taylor revealed that a Master System and Game Gear port had not only been in the works, but had actually been completed. Publisher Psygnosis cut the release short, deeming it no longer commercially viable to invest in Sega's 8-bit platforms. They were considered just too old to expect profitable returns, and these fears were exacerbated by the high cost of cartridge production in Europe. In fact, the only 8-bit platform release that Lemmings 2 saw was on the Game Boy, which was incredibly successful and still relevant at the time. Matt Taylor disagreed with the decision, and in his opinion the Game Gear port was the superior version above all others. He believed the game put the so-called outdated 8-bit consoles through their paces, pushing them to the limit and demonstrating just how much they could do. Taylor eventually released the ROMs of the Master System and Game Gear versions of Lemmings 2 in 2014, giving retro enthusiasts a new game to play on their platform of choice over 20 years after its release. We've talked a little about how the arcades shaped the Master System, but to get into some of the wider iterations of the console, we have to go a little further back, to the year 1945 to be precise, right after the end of the Japanese occupation of Korea. Tensions in the region culminated in South Korea enacting a law to restrict the distribution of media, primarily of Japanese origin. As a result, Sega couldn't publish their gaming products in Korea. In a bid to sidestep the embargo, Sega approached Samsung, a Korean company, to manufacture and distribute the Master System on their behalf to avoid causing any upset. This also necessitated a name change, and so the Master System was introduced to the Korean market as the Game Boy. Nintendo also struck up a similar agreement with Hyundai for the distribution of the NES, renamed the Comboy. These clone versions were of a far higher quality than the cheap knockoffs manufactured by many third-party companies, remaining almost identical to the real thing besides the obvious rebranding. The only significant difference between the Japanese and Korean versions of the Master System is its controller design. Its curved edges set it apart, and the cross-shaped D-pad is particularly striking considering this feature had already been patent protected by Nintendo. While there were several Master System exclusives released in Korea, the relaxed copyright laws encouraged piracy and the distribution of unlicensed products. This resulted in a games library resembling something of a Wild West, with a mishmash of Korean, Japanese, and English ports and translations. The agreement between Sega and Samsung would extend to the distribution of the Mega Drive and Saturn in later years, including a re-release of the Game Boy as the Aladdin Boy, possibly in a bid to align it with Samsung's Aladdin PC line. Eventually, Samsung would duck out of the console race after poor sales of the Saturn, with only 2,000 units sold in its first month. This is unsurprising considering its 550,000 won price tag, roughly $460, making it the most expensive console on the Korean market at the time. In contrast, the Game Boy sold incredibly well, moving an estimated 130,000 units in 1989. The South Korean ban on Japanese cultural imports would only begin to relax in 1998 with the allowance of manga, lifting further again in 2004 to include films, music, and indeed video games. As the rest of the world moved on to newer consoles, the Master System's lifespan in Brazil extended long after its decline everywhere else, and brand new titles were even ported over from the Game Gear, Sega's direct competitor to Nintendo's Game Boy. One such title was Sonic Blast. While the name may imply some kind of connection to the Mega Drive and Saturn's Sonic 3D Blast, the only thing the two games have in common is Sonic & Co. Sonic Blast was otherwise known as G-Sonic, the last first-party title released for the Game Gear in Japan. While the Master System's higher screen resolution allowed players to see more of the environment than they could on a handheld screen, the ports came with a raft of issues. High visual detail was sacrificed in order to accommodate the Master System's smaller palette, leading to a compression of colour that's not easy on the eyes. There were also very few changes that accounted for the increase in screen size beyond a few borders in menus and loading screens. This meant gameplay was frequently afflicted by graphical artifacts and screen flickering. To top it off, the game is impossible to run on earlier Master System models due to its 1MB cartridge size, which is enormous compared to games made back in the Master System's heyday. While Sonic Blast is critically panned by retro enthusiasts and is seen as a disappointing end to the Game Gear's cycle, the Master System port's existence is just one of many that prove the Brazilian market was strong enough for Tectoy to put any time or money into developing it in the first place. In fact, the console is still being produced in Brazil today. After multiple re-releases, its current iteration looks a little different than the original, with Tectoy having done away with a cartridge slot in the noughties. Today, Brazilian consumers can pick up a Master System complete with 132 games built in for 149 real, which works out to about $40, making it by far the cheapest console available in the country. While gaming interest in Brazil has not shifted to PC, the Master System continues to sell approximately 150,000 units a year. Not bad for a console in its mid-30s. The Master System's extensive library, unsurprisingly, also includes an extensive selection of Easter eggs. Within Sega's Phantasy Star, hidden items called M-System and Zillion were uncovered by players, clearly references to the Master System, as well as Zillion, another first-party title developed for the console. Neither of these items can be used or sold, given that they can only be added to the player inventory via cheats or hacking. The arcade version of Space Harrier required the player to enter a specific button sequence at the beginning of a stage, before the stage name left the screen. If entered correctly, a hidden development credit is displayed for programmer Yu Suzuki, and signed November 1985. Space Harrier's release on the Master System went a step further, with a hidden message that appears only after the player fills all 7 high score entries with ERI, accessed by scoring over 1 million points in 7 playthroughs without turning the console off. A message appears for about 50 seconds before returning to the game's title screen and reads, "Wonderful, fantastic you, smart guy. Please send us your thoughts to this game. We'll answer a letter with something to the first 10 persons. So forgive us, if your letter is out of 10, we can't reply to yours. By the way, can you see why you can find this message?" Followed by Sega's Tokyo address. And now it's time for this episode's random piece of trivia. Today we're talking about Namco's Tekken Tag Tournament, which originally released exclusively for the PlayStation 2, besides the arcades, that is. According to the game's producer Katsuhiro Harada, Sega tried to swoon Namco out of its exclusivity however. Sega told Namco that if they were willing to port Tekken Tag Tournament to the Dreamcast, they'd give Namco the right to put a Virtua Fighter character of their choice into the game for free. Namco declined their offer.
Hello and welcome to the 5th annual PGA Tour Golf Tournament.
That's the Patreon Golf Association for the uninitiated.
That's right, Derek. You're joining us on the 69th hole of the Three Master Gamers Cup.
First of all, we should thank our sponsors, Wymoop, Queen Mabs, Patent Pencil Sharpeners. Because you know what they say, Tom, a sharp pencil in the hand is a Robert Cox in the pocket.
It's a beautiful day here on the Marcavio course, and we have the absolute pleasure of watching Chad Barnon, Clefairy, Corey Nelson, and Gary CXJK stroke the ball.
That's a lot of C's, Tom.
It sure is, Derek. Yesterday we saw Arcady Skywalker trounce the competition with an easy eagle using his signature Jetasol 7 clubs.
A tough day for Jackie H and Everett Lathrop though, who both equally saw an error 1355 and just couldn't get out of the rough.
Sounds like they had a fair way to go to winning that tournament and wearing the awesome jacket, dude.
Last year, of course, your boy Beowulf won the legendary garment, just trumping Trevor Wooten.
Later on in our coverage, we'll be joined by Vitas Varnas for his thoughts on the proceedings, but for now, I guess we'll watch Guillermo Chavez swing that fucking club around.
Stay tuned for Joshua Buck.
A special thank you to the Nostalgia Nerd for lending us his voice for this episode of Did You Know Gaming Extra. Of course, thank you to our patrons, they always keep us keeping on. If you get the chance, be sure to check out the Nostalgia Nerd on YouTube. He is a very, very smart boy. I wish there was a way for me to quantify in vocal terms how much crazy retro stuff the Nostalgia Nerd has in his office, which we share with him and, of course, Ashens. Maybe one day we'll all appear in a video sometime. Who knows? Who knows? But subscribe to him anyway, even if we don't. Until next time.